Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
It's our 100th episode.
Happy 100th.
Happy 100th.
100.
I am so pleased that we've made it this far and that everyone has stuck with us through thick and thin.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, I've heard people in the industry, the pod industry, and like content creation generally say that, oh, once you have done 100 of the thing, then you're like baseline competent. So now we have like baseline competence in making podcast episodes.
Okay.
About education, teaching, and learning. Okay. Congratulations. How does it feel to be competent?
I think probably the best I feel any day is competent. So competent.
It feels good to feel competent. Couple of things. We're not doing our headlines this week because we're doing a special format for the episode. We're going to do an Ask Me Anything style. We have questions from listeners who have written in. We have other questions that we sprinkled in. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to get to know you and us as the hosts with some of these questions. And yeah, we want to thank you so much for listening. We've had such a fun time making this podcast over the years. I feel honored that we've made it to 100 and basic competence. And
in basic competence.
Basic competence feels really good.
Podcasting 101, basic competence.
So we're going to have a bunch of questions. I talked to some of Kate's colleagues and people in her life who are adjacent to the educational system, and they have responded to some of these questions too. So we're going to hear from some of your friends and colleagues and family.
I feel like this is making me emotional. I'm probably going to cry.
It'll be uplifting, I promise. So
no, I know, but I just like the people you've talked to are like very important people to me in terms of my career. So that's like, anyways.
Yeah. We might try to make you a little emotional if you don't mind.
I already am. I don't know why.
Go ahead and sign up for our email newsletter where you will hear announcements, interesting things we're doing, events, offerings, upcoming episodes, stuff like that. We don't email very often. We won't spam you. Yeah, like I said, okay, no headlines this week, no fill in the blank, because we're asking all kinds of questions and we have a lot to get through. So, without further ado, we should probably go ahead and get started. This first section of our Teacher Ask Me Anything is about getting to know you and us and personal interests and preferences. Most of these are from listeners of the show. Your very first question is, who is your favorite well-known, big-name author, writer, playwright? I guess the person who wrote this provided Shakespeare or Poe, people like that as examples. Who is your favorite author or writer to read? And then who's your favorite big name author or writer to teach?
I do. My kids love Poe. He's a favorite of theirs.
Is that your favorite teaching? Okay.
Also, I've been teaching a new unit this year it's all Maya Angelou's poetry. My kids love it. Love it, love it.
That's a new thing for you that you haven't taught before, right?
It's a new unit. My kids also loved when I taught Arthur Miller's The Crucible. I'm thinking of like specific pieces that my kids always enjoy.
That's really funny because when Allison was talking about that piece in particular was one where she said that the kids express some resistance to it at first because it's a play. Like they don't want to read plays for whatever reason.
When you get to the heart of how ridiculous it is, though, they get it because they're teenagers, and that's what the play is about. Yeah, I think right now I'd probably say Poe is a favorite for sure. Okay. He's like having a moment.
To teach. What about to read? Just for your own personal enrichment.
My own personal
Your own personal enrichment.
When I'm in my habitat and I need to be
enriched.
I love anything by the Green Brothers. If there's a new one, that's all I care about is getting the next Green Brother book.
John and Hank. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
I've really started liking Ann Patchett a lot.
Okay.
And I've kind of gotten into Stephen King recently, but that has not been a lifelong thing of mine. So that's a new thing, I would say. That's kind of a new venture for me.
I've never read any Stephen King.
Yeah, it's a commitment. You have to be in the right headspace for Stephen King. It's not a casual pickup. A couple other like fluff. I hate to call people fluff because no writer is fluff, but I also really like Emily Henry's books. They're like good escape pieces. And Meryl Wisner. I like her stuff a lot too.
Okay.
So, a little bit of everything in there.
Okay, well, we're going to stay on the topic of books for the next one.
Okay.
And this question is, what is one book that changed your life?
That's tough.
Yeah.
Wow, this is so much pressure for an English teacher. There's so much pressure as an English teacher because you're expected to be like a library of your own, right?
Yes.
Like kids are like, have you read this? And if I say no, you would think that I like did not support a public library.
True.
Because they're like,
True. They're like, how dare you not have read this one book that I really like?
I would say like Mr. Popper's Penguins when I was a little kid was pretty important. That was the first chapter book I'd ever read.
Oh.
I love that book. I would also say like Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends is probably up there. That was a book I read, I don't know, more times than I can count. As I've gotten older, gosh, this is so hard. Actually, I think probably the last book I felt that strongly about was Hank Green's first book. I could not shut up about that book. It made me love to be a reader again, and I was like 30.
An absolutely remarkable thing.
Yeah. I feel like that book really reignited me as far as like getting back into reading. I don't know why this book hit me so hard when we read it, but I'm going to go back to Anne Patchett's The Dutch House. That's up there too. That book really, I don't know what it was. I don't know why that book, everybody that I tell that book struck me so deeply is like, really? It's a good book, but I don't know why. That book just hit me really hard for some reason.
Great.
I feel like I'm going to be thinking about these questions until this podcast drops. And I'm going to wish I had said something different.
This was a really hard question to answer because I feel like every book that I read changes my life somehow.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I
try to sum it up and go back over books that have kind of like really changed my own thinking. And I actually was just talking when I interviewed Terry, your coworker, for this episode. We were talking about this a little bit, but we were talking about how different our lives might have been had we discovered that mathematics can be fun earlier in our lives. And I was telling Terry about how in college, my freshman math, the whole year was spent basically going step by step through Euclid's Elements, geometric proofs and theorems and things like that. And that definitely changed the way that I thought about my own learning because I realized I could like math and enjoy it and do well at it. And I felt like I had a whole new vocabulary, but yeah, that changed my outlook on math. So that was kind of important. It's funny you mention the Green Brothers because I think also Turtles All the Way Down is a book that changed my life in a way because it gave me a vocabulary for mental health stuff that I didn't realize I was lacking. It kind of named experiences that I have had that I didn't really realize prior to that point were anything out of the ordinary. It's a pretty difficult book about, I don't know, I guess what would you call it? What is it about primarily?
It's from the perspective of a character who is suffering from really severe OCD.
Yeah, it's about mental health, basically. And I don't mean to say that I have exactly the same struggles that that character did, but just some of the descriptions of the experience of mental health crises really were interesting to me and gave me a vocabulary to understand some of my own experience of the world. So that was interesting. And then the last one that I put in here was The Color of Law, because I can't stop thinking about that book, the history of redlining and segregation and how it's baked into the law in this country. I think that really redirected a lot of my thinking about how deeply ingrained some of these problems are in day-to-day existence in America.
I feel like my Mr. Popper's Penguins answer is kind of weak, but
No, it's not.
it was the first chapter book I read by myself. That felt very important as a child.
It is important.
That opened up every other book, basically.
Well, you became empowered as a reader by that book. That's fine.
We'll go with that.
Okay, let's move on. What is one book where you prefer the book to its movie adaptation? And then also the flip. Okay. What is one movie adaptation that you like better than the book?
I really liked the movie where the crawdads sing. I liked the book. I think the movie did it really well. So I might say the movie there.
Okay.
I also would probably lump in most of Nicholas Sparks's movies.
Better than the books.
Far preferable than the books. There are a couple of his books that are pretty good, but the movies are pretty solid.
Okay.
We just watched Lessons in Chemistry, and I just read the book before, and I definitely think the book is a lot better. More cohesive. I think, depending on which Harry Potter book, I could go back and forth. Does that make sense? Some of the movies, I prefer the book. Some of the books, I prefer the movies.
100% Harry Potter, I prefer the movies, just in general.
But also, my favorite books are also my favorite movies, so it, like... You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Order of the Phoenix is still one of my favorite books, and that's still probably one of my favorite movies of the series.
Okay.
I think that's where I am.
I don't know how to answer. I'll put one that's in the middle where I just can't decide what I like better, and I feel like I'm going to take so much criticism for this, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I'm just finishing the trilogy for the first time, and I've been around the Inklings and stuff since I was a kid, so I love this world and whatnot, but I'd never read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'd read The Hobbit when I was a kid, but never the Lord of the Rings. And I enjoyed those books a lot, and I love the world and the creativity of all of it. I think that the movies are a very different project as adaptations, and they obviously they miss a lot of what's in the books, but I like the movies. I can't decide if I like them as much or more than the books. So
I don't think that's a bad take. I think you'll be okay.
Okay. This next question, we're gonna have a little bit of help from one of our interviewees.
Hey, my name is Jack, and I taught for 30 years at various grade levels from elementary to high school.
What subjects did you teach?
Reading, social studies, special ed, language arts.
And I'll let you go ahead and listen to his response first. But the question is, how would you describe your own learning style?
I don't know. I was more an auditory learner. I could sit and listen. When I was in school, I never read. I never read a history book, but I got straight A's in history because I'd sit and listen to the lecture. And as I got older, I really learned how to take good notes. And that's what helped me. I would listen, write down what I heard, and then I could look at it and remember it. Yeah. But I was really an auditory learner.
Do you recognize that learner's voice?
That's my dad.
That's your dad. We talked to your dad, a veteran educator. So your dad's an auditory learner. How would you describe your own learning style?
I think I'm probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
If I hear it, I have a pretty good chance of committing it. But also, I was taught by him. So I hear him talk about the way he learned. And that's exactly how he taught me to learn, too. Same thing, notes. If I hear it once, I can usually remember it. If I'm reading it on my own, my comprehension is a lot slower. So I'd have to reread it multiple times. But I feel like I get a pretty good grip if I hear it and I write it down. I'm definitely someone who has to write something down to remember it.
I don't have all of the distinctions in these categories very clear in my head. I can definitely tell the difference in how engaged I am in different scenarios, but I'm not really sure I could even speak to like what my kind of best learning style is. But I don't really go from just like listening to something to absorbing it. I think it's like a little bit too passive for me. I describe my own learning style as like more verbal than auditory, meaning that I learn by talking through things. Like that's just how I process information, is like in dialogue with other people who are also working through things. That's kind of how I also tend to be like global. I need like a holistic systems level understanding of things a lot of times.
I don't.
I need to see how all the pieces fit together, and then I can grasp something. But
Right.
I'm
not that way.
Yeah, I tend to need an overview.
You're like a parts of a whole kind of learner. If I was handed a transcript and read it, and if I heard the same thing said to me, right, read aloud instead, it would probably be double what I picked up by hearing it versus by what I got by reading it on my own.
I think that's true too. Yeah, I think that's true of me, especially if we're talking about stuff that you would read in your English class.
Yeah, like my comprehension would be fine.
Yeah.
It would not be as detailed as if I was listening to it in real time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think that whoever's reading it conveying some meaning with like inflection is what is important there?
I think so too. And also because I think if you're listening to someone teach, you can understand better where you need to put your focus.
This is actually why the way people read poetry makes me nuts sometimes. I struggle with people who have these like kind of overly flowery dramatic readings of poems that don't necessarily warrant overly flowery dramatic readings, because I think it like distracts my brain. I'm just like, wait, that's not really the emotion. Yeah. Or if I just like disagree with the tone or something, I find it too distracting. And so that's why I think maybe not so much auditory, but like that's why I'm trying to say verbal, meaning I have to be engaged in the conversation around the learning rather than just hearing it. Yeah. Because if I'm just hearing stuff, I'm probably too distracted by my own internal monologue about what I think about it to like really process. So
For sure.
This next question is fun. So I think we've talked on the show about Clifton Strengths, the Strengths Finder assessment. This is a tool that gets used in a lot of professional settings, not just education, but you've had some experience with it in a professional setting too, right? Didn't you take the Strengths Quest?
Yeah, and some of our kids did as well.
Yeah, and we have I think I've mentioned this before, but we have a friend who's a corporate trainer, and he does a lot of stuff with Clifton Strengths tests. So anyway, you and I both are going to share our top 10 Clifton Strengths. So would you like to go first and just give us your top 10?
If you did your bottom 10 and I did my top 10, those would be the same list.
Oh, not quite.
No, I know.
We're not quite the inverse, but we're close.
All
okay,
right.
So what are yours?
My number 1 is harmony.
Harmony.
My number 2 is context. 3 is restorative. 4 is consistency. 5 is input. 6, responsibility. 7, discipline. 8, includer. 9, arranger. 10 is connectedness.
Wow. I'm going to do mine in order 1 to 10.
I have no influencing in my themes.
These things get categorized. Yeah. And you are not into influencing.
I am an executor. That's my top one, executing.
That's what I'm bad at.
I'm like pretty mixed of relationships and strategic. So those things like work together.
Yeah.
Like my top, like harmony is a relationship builder, which is
what is harmony?
True.
Tell us about your top one. What
harmony
does that mean?
is just wanting everybody to get along.
I just want everybody to be friends, guys.
So it says I can thrive. I look for consensus. I hate conflict. And I seek ways for us to agree. That's me in a nutshell.
That's not me. I don't know.
Context is about thinking about the past and understanding the present by researching the past. Restorative is I'm good at dealing with problems and I'm good at figuring out what's wrong and resolving it. I agree with that. My 4th is consistency. I'm keenly aware of the need to treat people the same. I crave stable routines and clear rules and procedures that everyone can follow.
That's true. That's so true.
And input was my 5th. I have a need to collect and archive.
Yeah.
And I like to accumulate information, ideas, artifacts, or relationships.
Okay, we have that one.
I'm a people gatherer.
We have that one in common in our top 10. That's my number 2, input.
Is it?
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me about you at all.
No.
Because you're a collector. You're a collector for sure.
So mine were, number 1 is a learner. Go figure. Yeah. I have a need to learn things and I'm driven by it. And that's probably why we were running a podcast.
Learner is 20 for me.
Jeez, that's so interesting because you like to learn too.
I do.
But I mean, okay.
Differently.
So I need to be clear. Just because it's lower ranked doesn't mean it's not important to you. It just means your brain maybe isn't organized to necessarily
value it,
have that be at the forefront of everything. So anyway, okay, mine were learner as number 1, input, which is that need to collect and archive, which I absolutely do have. Ideation. I'm fascinated by ideas and connections between seemingly disparate phenomena.
It's in my bottom 3.
Interesting. Okay, intellection, proclivity toward introspection and appreciating quote unquote intellectual discussion. I didn't come up with these
I'm
terms.
surprised
These
that's
are
not
from
your number one.
command, which I'm not sure I understand why this is where it is, but
Tell me the definition.
it's the definition for it is you have presence, you can take control of a situation and make decisions. See, I don't like to usually be the one to like barge in and say we're doing this,
But you will.
but I will if I feel that the situation is like in need of a direction. I will be like, okay, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Then it was competition, strategic, futuristic, activator, and individualization.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of strategy in my top 10.
There
so
is.
That was my 1 to 10. But
Nice.
learner being number 1 seems to make a lot of sense for me.
I agree with that.
All right, next question. If a parent were to bring in a snack for parent-teacher conferences, what would you want them to bring? We do have one response here from Jack again,
Of course.
which I think you'll appreciate.
Okay.
Can't go wrong with donuts. I mean, or pizza.
Pizza or donuts?
Yeah, in a parent-teacher conference, pizza would be the thing because it's late in the day. Yeah.
Donuts.
Can't go wrong with donuts.
I am surprised not at all that his answer was donuts. That's so funny.
He loves donuts.
Oh my God, I love donuts. Here's my thing. You don't eat everything every kid brings in.
Uh-huh.
Do we understand that? So I'm gonna say maybe pizza.
Pizza.
That it's in a box. Somebody else made it.
It's in a box.
It travels well. He's right. It's in the evening. Sweet treats, though. You know.
You
I'm
do have a
happy.
sweet tooth.
I have a sweet tooth for sure. It doesn't have to be donuts, but you know.
Do you like donuts?
Not like my dad does. No.
Yeah. He has a real special
My
affinity
parents
for
just
donuts.
love donuts. Yeah. I think for as long as I've been teaching, I think I've gotten donutted out. Does that make sense? Because that's like an easy thing to feed teachers. So
True.
I think I'm pretty much over donuts most
You've reached
days.
your limit. Okay.
Yeah, you could bring me snacks. You could bring me cash. You could bring me,
For my snack, I would like cold Hundies.
20s. Okay, Hondos. Yeah.
Okay. All right, last one in this very first section, and then we're
Okay.
going to move on to some stuff about the life of the teacher. But here's the last one on the getting to know you. Do you have a silly restroom pass that you make your kids take?
don't.
No.
I don't.
Thank you. I always got really annoyed by that. I was
Yeah.
like, I do not want to be made to look ridiculous because I have to pee.
Yeah.
That was my thing.
One of my coworkers has kids carry around, it's like a stuffed alligator.
Yeah, see, that's
And I just-
unsanitary.
yeah, I look at it and I'm like, ew. No, my kids don't carry a
Yeah,
pass.
that's the first concern is that this is an object that you're taking to the bathroom with you.
Mm-hmm.
The other concern is why
Yeah.
are we making people carry weird things to the bathroom?
No, I think the days of those are kind of past.
That was like, we came from the era of ridiculous
Well,
restroom passes.
There were a couple of teachers in our high school that had some pretty stupid stuff you carried. So.
There was definitely one teacher where you teach, a toilet seat was the restroom pass.
That's kind of funny. I can appreciate that.
I mean, it is funny, but until you have to be the one who has to go to the bathroom, then it's
Right.
no longer
And-
really all that entertaining.
So the coworker who had this alligator, like you would walk into the bathroom and there'd be an alligator laying on the floor.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would just be sitting there and you're like, oh, hey, are you in line? You know, like
Are you in line?
whatever. So yeah, no, I think for the most part, we're all past that.
Okay, moving on to the life of the teacher. Tell us about your work-life balance. What does it look like for
What's
a
that?
typical teacher? What is this balance you say?
My work-life balance has gotten better every year I've taught.
Not automatically. I just want to say you have worked hard at this.
That's a combination of knowing what's important, but it gets easier every year.
Yeah.
So what I notice is the first time I teach a unit requires a lot of take-home work. Every time I teach it after that, it gets easier and easier and easier. And I also learn with teaching units repeatedly what works, what doesn't. I used to lay in bed and do work, and I've like put a limit on that. I no longer work like while I'm in bed. Within reason, I will bring home stuff to grade, essays, things like that. Since I teach English, obviously, a lot of my time is just spent grading essays. I would love to get to the point where I say, my work is work, and it's done at work, and it's done. I think that some of that's hard for teachers in general.
Okay.
I think it's hard to be done.
I'm going to call you out from an outsider observation because you are talking all about grading and bringing that work home and that defining your work-life balance without talking about the fact that you are involved in so many things at the school that you spend so many hours beyond the typical scheduled school day at school or at a school event. You're acting like that's not part of the work-life balance equation, and I would just like to point out that it absolutely is.
It is, but I would say even from my first 5 years, this is significantly better than it ever was. So,
well, you used to coach. That was a big commitment,
I coached,
too.
But also, when I first took over the yearbook, I covered a lot of the events because my yearbook staff was so small. And now that my staff is growing, it's easier for me to divvy them up and have them cover events. I've also learned that I can let go of things. This is my control issue. I used to want to be the one to go to the game and take the photos to make sure it got done, and I realized that wasn't any good for me.
Yeah.
So the older I've gotten, the more trusting I've become. You have to have like a buy-in from the students, right? Like they have to have a stake in it, and that's their grade. So like those things have helped me free up my time. As far as like student council and things like that, like, yeah, that does require time. Like homecoming is busy, that kind of thing. But I feel like it comes and goes in such sporadic, you know what I mean?
I feel like on the whole, you have a pretty good grip on it. Yeah. I will say there are times in the school year when I just like don't see you for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, bye.
Certainly. Yeah. Like the end of the year is like that. It does come and go. There are definitely lulls, but I think on the day to day, I really try to get out of school like an hour after school. Like I try to be out the door by like 3:30 because my day's over at 2:30. Try to get as much done in that hour as I can. And then certainly there's still some things I do while I'm home, but I do try for the most part to wrap it all up in that hour so that once I'm home, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Which has been a good kind of rule for me, you know. I try to give myself that hour and crank out as much as I can. And usually that means I don't have too much to do at home, so.
Okay. What is the best thing about being a teacher or your favorite part of the job? And we're going to hear from one of your coworkers that we haven't heard from yet. And then also Jack is going to be back for a response on this.
My name is Terry, and I've been teaching, this is my 34th year.
As far as you're concerned, what's the best thing about being a teacher or your favorite part of the job?
Oh my gosh, the kids. Everything else goes along with it. You know, you have to do it. But the kids are the fun part. I never stop learning about how the kids learn. I never stop seeing a totally new perspective. I have met so many amazing, cool people because I'm a teacher. A student that you would know, it was asking me one thing for the newspaper, and he said, well, what do you like about teaching? I said, I don't have the same day twice. Mm-hmm. I just don't have that because I have 100 kids. I mean, on any given day, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I certainly don't. And as much as, you know, I've been doing the same job for 34 years, it has not been the same. Everything else, I've been in the same room. If everything else was the same, the kids would make it different. So, and that's what I will miss.
Yeah.
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 When I leave, it will be the kids mostly.
First one, what did you think was the best part about being a teacher or your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part was probably just talking to kids, especially when we're not on subject. Just you know, carry on conversations to find out what they're like and stuff that they like to do, and a lot of times they would occur after class. So that's what I really like.
They like the kids. Mm-hmm. Do you like the kids?
Some days. I'm crying.
Oh.
God, why is this happening? Hearing Terry talk is really bittersweet. She would be making fun of me right now. Hearing Terry talk is so bittersweet because it's almost over for her.
Yeah.
And I've had her every day for 11 years.
Yeah.
There's no one better at their job than her. So, whew, I agree with both of them. I think if those aren't your answers, then what are you doing? And why are you there? Like Terry said, my days may seem similar, right? I've taught this lesson before. I've read this book before. Man, they're all different. And that's what makes it so much fun. For someone like me who craves order and discipline and stability and routine and all of these things, I do get it all, but with the variations of them. That's what makes it fun. Yeah, that hit me. Oh, she is someone that every teacher needs as their mentor. And she is someone that anyone could learn from.
Yeah, I think I told you after I got done recording that interview with her, I was like, dang, I wish I would have had her as a teacher.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like it would have made a big difference in my life.
I've been learning from Terry every day for 11 years. You know, she was my assigned mentor. She's been on my side, you know, through it all. So
yeah,
it's hard to hear her.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sorry to do this to you, but we're going to have to hear from her again.
No, the hard thing about Terry is I want to share her with everyone. I just wish she could do it forever. You know?
Yeah. Okay, well, Terry also had a response to the next question, which is, what's the hardest part of being a teacher, or your least favorite part?
They're kind of the same thing, but I mean, least favorite part would be like having to sit in meetings that don't seem to be relevant to what I'm talking about, what really happens in my daily life. But by far the most frustrating aspect of teaching is when there are students that you cannot make any connection with, cannot help them move forward, and you worry what's going to happen to you down the road. Mm-hmm. And not that they don't deserve any consequences that you give them, but it just breaks your heart because you have this opportunity. And maybe, I mean, part of it is that I love school and I still love learning, and and so it's like, how can you not take advantage of this? But when you have a student who just is like, "Meh," and really tunes out, and it's like, well, I'm just going to sleep, and I'm just not going to, don't try to help me because I don't really care about what you're asking me to do, and I'm going to just go on with my life without this taking advantage of anything. And that's really hard.
Yeah, I think that's my answer. It's hard to feel like you can't connect with kids for whatever reason, either because of what they have going on at home, or maybe you're just a bad match for each other. I try not to take it too personal because people just don't click sometimes, right? And that's true in every stage of our lives. There are just some people we don't mesh with.
Yeah.
But teaching is a thing where the connection is what makes it valuable, and the trust and the willingness, right, to put yourself out there. And so when you're met with kids who can't or won't or whatever, it's very hard because you feel like I'm pouring into you. You have to pour back for this to work. It's a give and take. Just to keep tooting Terry's horn, she teaches one of the most difficult class loads of anybody at the high school. High level of students with identified concerns and issues and things like that. She especially is working with a very specific group of students who need her and need a connection to an adult that is maybe the most stable person in their life. So she's in the trenches. Like, she is in the trenches for sure.
Speaking of being in the trenches, the next question that we have again from a listener is, what's the pay like?
Pennies.
Also, I love this.
Goodwill.
There was a specific request to describe how much money you get for extracurriculars versus how much time you put in for them. And I've heard you do this calculation too, because you don't have to tell us like what exactly your stipends are, but you did do the work to figure out how much like hourly you were getting paid for some of these extracurriculars.
It's comical.
Wasn't it like $2.50 an hour or something
like that? Yeah. The district that I work in pays higher for the area on average, I will say. Mm-hmm. I think when I started about 11 years ago, I was a first year teacher. I had no experience. What year was that? I think the class of 2014 was my first graduating class. So 2013-14. I think I made like $33,000. I make a little bit more than that now, but I have a master's. I would say for my experience and my education now, I'm probably in the lower middle of the road, maybe, for people with about my level.
Yeah.
For the state.
I would say compared to other people in the profession, you make a normal amount of money. Compared to other professions, teachers do not make a reasonable amount of money.
I think to top out in my district right now, if I had double masters and 30 plus years of experience, I would probably be in the high 70s. Maybe low 80s as a teacher. That's lower than other places, but in the state, but that's also higher than other, so like, it's all about where you physically teach. Could teachers make more money? Sure. My extracurriculars are hilarious. One of my best friends and I split a stipend for NHS and for student council. And this is the first year I've done it, so I can't even tell you what I'll clear. I would guess maybe a nice dinner somewhere will be my take home. Like a sit down dinner.
This is like dozens and dozens of hours of work. Like, I don't know. How many hours do you say you put into those
NHS
things?
is not as many because we meet during school. Student council is more just because of the dances and things like that.
There are a lot of logistics.
But the prep hours.
Yeah, the prepping and planning.
But luckily, I'm able to use my prep at school a lot for that kind of work. So that does help. And I do have student aides who help with some of the stuff. So my coworker, Lindsay, and I, the one that I share this with, we are very fortunate to have really, really wonderful secretaries and things like that who help us a lot. Do we make enough money? Of course we don't. But no one does, right? If you're teaching. I think when I was coaching, this has been a few years ago now, I was an assistant varsity softball coach. I think my stipend was like $1,200 for a season. 12 or 1,500, I think, was the stipend.
You're asking me if it sounds right. I'm thinking of the amount of time that you spent doing it, which it does not sound right.
No, well, but that's what it was.
Something like that.
But I would bet that most coaches probably make, if they're assistant varsity, maybe between like 1,500 and varsity coaches maybe at the top make 5,000 or 6,000 for a season. But when you talk about hours, no, it doesn't equate. But that's not what you do it for. So luckily, and support your public schools and vote for levies, please.
Yeah. Hey, maybe we should stop.
Hey,
defunding education? Maybe. What is in your day-to-day teacher survival kit? And we're going to hear from your coworker, Allison.
I already know what hers is.
Yeah.
My name is Allison, and this is my third year of teaching.
What is in your day-to-day teacher survival kit?
My water bottles. I have a stash of chocolate that I dipped into a lot my first year. Mm-hmm. What else? My blue light glasses.
Oh, yeah.
My record player so I can listen to my music, and it's quiet. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's it.
That girl loves her emotional support water bottles.
They're a fixture.
They are. It's like her +1 everywhere she goes.
Yes, she goes everywhere with them.
She'll meet us for a meal and she brings it.
Mm-hmm.
I love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think. In my backpack is pretty much anything I could ever need. My backpack is what comes to and from school with me every day. It goes everywhere. It has medicines. It has ointments. It has a first aid kit. It has pens, pencils, tape, chargers for everything.
So you're helping everybody else survive, not just...
I'm helping myself
not
survive.
Not just you, but also everyone else
No,
around
I'm
you.
self-serving. It's for me. There's like tampons, there's Band-Aids. I'm ready. That thing goes everywhere. It has my iPad.
Your go bag.
It is a go bag. It has all my keys. It literally, if there was ever a reason I had to take off at school, the backpack would be what I grabbed and I would run because it would have my stuff in it.
Okay.
At school, I have like my fridge and stuff like that, so that helps me survive. I have a snack drawer, of course. I think those are the highlights. This is not like necessary, but over the past couple of years, I've been like improving the vibe of my classroom with like lights and stuff. That's helped a lot, but that's not like survival. It just like helps me survive.
That counts. That counts.
So yeah, I would say my backpack has like everything in it, and I'm like ready for whatever comes my way. I have it. I'm good to go.
Next questions are about classroom culture vibes. I can tell this is from Tracy again, and I can tell he was trying to be delicate about it, but he's like, so are things getting worse over time? Has it become more difficult to teach over the course of your career? Do you notice? I mean, it's not even a feeling. We are measurably falling behind peer countries. Things seem to be getting not better, at the very least. So yeah, this is a question. Like, do you feel that is the case? Is it kind of just like that's what's happening on test scores, but that's not what's happening on the ground? Like, what is your take on that?
I think I'm at a little bit of a disconnect probably with this question because this year has improved greatly for me. On the whole, it feels like there are always new problems. You've probably heard of the idea of like an armchair quarterback, right? Which is like the guy who sits at home watching the game is like the mastermind of the offense, right? Like he could do it better, he could whatever. And I think that there are always going to be like armchair quarterbacks or experts about something. And those voices are always loud. So I think that probably what's getting harder is that aspect, which is that like social media and the internet and things has like allowed people to think that their voice is just as important as somebody else's, and it is loud, so it should be heard and screaming, which isn't worth listening to. But because they can ruffle, you know, they are heard. I think that's hard. And that's something that's definitely changed over 11 years. I don't think it's getting harder personally. I think it's getting easier, but that's because I've been doing it longer, which makes me more comfortable to handle things that earlier in my career I would have been uncomfortable to handle. But today I'm like, just stay in your lane, you know? So I think there's a confidence thing that comes with it.
Yeah.
We know that education is in a state of emergency. We know that there are not teachers to be hired. We know that there are not subs. One of our really good friends is a college professor, and he said that for a position that had been opened for I think it would have been a tenure track eventually, they had 4 people apply. Mm-hmm. When I was in college, we used to have 50 plus applicants for an English posting. So is that a concern? Yeah, of course. Is my job harder? I don't think so, but I've also learned to play the game pretty well. So
Let me ask, this is kind of a specific to English question. Do you think that the literacy crisis that we've been discussing for the last over the last couple of years in a couple of different ways, but especially with the soul to story trajectory, that the story of how we're teaching phonics, 3Qing method, all of that stuff, do you think that's made a measurable difference in your classrooms? Like, do you notice the impact of these struggles with literacy?
I notice the impact of the struggles. I don't think it's working. My kids cannot dissect a word to understand its parts, to give them any kind of clue of what it could mean or what the roots do for it. They can't say the words based on their understanding of how syllables work together or what a letter sounds like. And their comprehension is not great.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a real downer of an answer, but it's not working.
No, it's okay. You're allowed to. Yeah, I think it's important that people know that this is a problem and it starts extremely early on, because phonics instruction starts early. So by the time they get to you, they've already participated in this system that has been kind of shown to not work necessarily.
Yes. How it is being taught is not benefiting them later.
I don't mean to blame like every elementary English teacher or whatever it is. It's that this way of teaching became so pervasive that it was certainly what you and I were exposed to. Like it has just made its way into the American curriculum so thoroughly because it was so popular for so long that we all, you know, at least like millennial generation, probably all were taught at some point how to read this way.
I will say, though, that the other thing that I see in the classroom, I can tell you who the students are that have parents who read with them at home and those that didn't. Are there failures of the education system? Of course, but there were also expectations of parents. And I consider reading at home to be an expectation of parents. That's like my little soapbox. If I was to stand on a soapbox and scream, it would be to read at home with your kids.
This is a little bit of a related question, but it's going to be, what are the ways in which the teaching profession has changed over the course of your career as an educator?
What I remember from even early in my teaching days is there was so much more freedom to teach what you loved. It wasn't going off script, but to be able to explain your subject matter from that, this is why I love it. Let's do this.
I mean, I personally could tell when my teachers felt that way about the content that they were teaching and when they didn't. And it certainly made me more interested in pursuing things when I could tell that they were interested in it.
Well, because you get a joy in your mannerisms when you're talking about something that you absolutely love.
The increase of state-mandated paperwork that has nothing to do with testing, nothing to do with teaching, all the extra testing that takes away from teaching time. And I know in my heart the paperwork we filled out was never looked at. It's just something that got generated down the line. Principals needed it to give it to the superintendent needed it to give to the state, and then the state did nothing with it.
That's such a Jack answer.
Yeah, it is a very Jack answer. So both of these people have more than 30 years worth of career under their belt. So how about you in the course of your career, which is, you said you're 10 or 11 now?
This is year 11.
Year 11.
Yeah.
Okay, year 11.
Yeah. The longer I teach, the more I get put onto these committees and groups and things where we're answering these questions to report to the state for whatever. And I'm always like, what do they do with this? Who reads this? Do they read it? Do they see that we submitted it? Because we're working hard on it, right? My peers and coworkers, like, we work really hard to gather this data and collect it and submit it appropriately and to, identify and understand and whatever. And I'm always like, a lot of this is good for us, but a lot of it is good for them. And so I'm always like, who does read this somewhere? Some eye in the sky, it feels like. I mean, yeah, both of what they said is accurate. I would be curious to see what my day would be like and the freedom I could have if I wasn't a tested subject, but I do not see that changing. Now, I do feel pretty lucky at my district to get to teach what I want within the bounds of that state test, but there are still expectations. So it would be cool to someday not have to worry about a looming state test. There are certainly things I wish I could teach, but that just don't fall within the bounds of that state test, if that makes sense. We have talked about the state of education in Ohio and the changing and the not changing of the Department of Ed. And it just makes you wonder, do we have to pay so much to get a teaching license? Does it have to be this hard? Do all of these contraptions have to work like this? And I don't think they do. And I think that's the heart of what my dad was saying.
Next up, if you could no longer teach high schoolers, what grade or grades would you teach instead?
If I couldn't teach high schoolers, I would quit.
You don't want to teach younger?
No.
You wouldn't want to go to college?
Oh, I could do that. Yeah, I'd go to college.
Okay.
Can go younger.
You wouldn't want to go younger?
No.
Why is that?
I thought I wanted to be an early ed teacher. And then the summer after I graduated from high school, I got a job at a Montessori school. And day one, I went in there and I spent the day with, I think it was like the 4-year-old room. And I literally went home and I told my parents that I did not want to teach early ed anymore. And I seriously called my undergraduate institution and was like, we need to change my schedule. And I changed it immediately. So that fall when I got there, it was later years. I am not built for those people. They're too small. They're too fragile. I don't like tying shoes. I don't like snot. I don't like poop. I don't like any of those things. So I'm not built for that. So there's that end.
You know yourself.
I know myself.
What really happens in the teacher's lounge?
It's exactly what you think happens in the teacher's lounge. I'm not telling all my secrets.
Wow. Okay.
I'll just say this. No, we talk just like the students do. We catch up. We get the inside info.
All the hot goss.
The hot goss, yeah. Also, there are some days where we get in there and we're flat out like, if you talk about a student, I'm going to walk out because I have to be around adults right now. So there's like a very healthy balance. I will say that getting to eat with adults is a very important thing for teachers. And it's crucial to have time out of your classroom with other people.
Just like
a
moment of refuge in your day.
Like literally my first week of teaching at the school I work at, Terry came to my room every single day at the beginning of lunch to drag me to lunch because she knew how important it was for me to get out of the room. That like really set in my mind that I need to at least go in there and get away from kids for a while and make myself inaccessible, right? Because that's the hard part is like teachers are always on. Being in the lounge is a place where I'm not on. I'm Katie again, and these are my friends and whatever. So
makes sense.
It's exactly what you think it is.
Okay. Last one in this section. Are movie stereotypes of teachers real? And there are some examples given here of like history teachers are jocks and coaches and science teachers are nerds and art teachers are hippies, etc. I did not come up with those categories, but now that I'm hearing them, it just sort of sounds like a movie about high school.
It's like The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. A lot of those stereotypes hold true. I definitely think that I'm going to someday let out my barbaric yawp on a desk and inspire a group of boys at a small private school and to love poetry.
You're going to be really into Shakespeare.
Yeah, there will be little hints along the way. I have met people who obviously push all those molds and do not conform at all. But I always used to laugh when kids would be like, you don't look like an English teacher. And then I would like wear glasses and an oversized sweater. And they'd be like, you look like an English teacher. And it's like, well, you'll become what you are. So now I just lean into my big sweaters and my glasses. And I stand there like a old woman waiting for her love to come home on a ship. And, you know, like that's in my head where I am. That's why my dream is to live in a lighthouse. So I'm just setting myself up for it. But I do think that... what's the quote, like what you are is what you'll become or whatever, and that's kind of how it is to be a teacher. So
this next section is about teacher-student dynamics.
Okay.
A bit. Do you have any say about which students are or are not enrolled in your classes?
No. So I teach like the middle of the road 10th graders. Those students, if things go really poorly or if they're bored, then I'll get to go to the guidance to be like, I don't think they're well placed, but I'm not the one who decides one way or the other.
So you inform, you have some input, but you're not the deciding.
No.
It's hard when you're a tested subject. So you have less control over that.
Especially as an English teacher. I'm a core teacher,
right.
yeah. Right. So for 10th graders, if they're like probably college bound or some kind of other program after high school, they'll usually be with me. So like I said, if they're bored in my class and they're doing really well, then that's a kid I'd go to the guidance counselor.
What about like your media and composition classes?
Those students, like media has a prerequisite. So you have to take photography before you can take media. So as long as they fulfill that requirement, they can take media. For composition, they have to apply and be accepted into the university that I teach it through. Mm-hmm. But after that, I don't have a say.
Do you really read all of our essays?
It depends.
It depends. Okay, here, I will try to be delicate and tell about how you were talking about this the other day.
Okay.
There are some essays that you get that are so incomplete.
Oh, that's a good
or
word.
sort of unmatched to the task of the assignment that reading them all the way through is not necessarily going to do anything to enhance anybody's educational progress.
Uh-huh.
And in those situations, you have to sort of say, okay, to the student, it's like, we need to go back to the drawing board about this. And here's where, because you kind of described this scenario where you're like, hey, this draft is a real hot mess. And you were, being delicate about it. Those are my words, not yours. But like, we've got a hot mess of a situation here. We need to go back to the drawing board because we've kind of missed some of the fundamentals about what it is we're trying to accomplish with this assignment, right?
Yes.
Like, so there, I think...
Yes.
I will just say, from my experience, you definitely give your attention to every piece of work that a student provides to you.
True.
But that sometimes simply reading through words that have been put on a page is not, it's just not the task that is called for when it's time to grade.
Certainly.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
You've seen
Is that delicate enough?
Yeah, you've seen enough of me grading.
Okay.
I laugh and say no because that's the problem. So I have been grading and teaching long enough that I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And also, I'm a very quick reader, which helps me a lot. So yes.
All right.
And no.
Do teachers gossip about students?
Yes. Of course we do. What else would we do?
Moving on.
Next question. Can I add some context to that?
Oh, yeah, sure. You want to talk about the
I just
gossip?
don't want that to be my hot take.
Okay.
I will say, I think most of what we do is like, hey, did you hear this about the student? Did you notice anything? Because we're trying to suss out the situation. Like, if a kid's acting really weird in their class, we'll be like, ooh, something's going on. Like, because that's what we're trained to do.
Uh-huh.
So it's usually in terms of like looking for something that a concern or a whatever.
I have heard, okay, so it kind of qualifies as gossip, but it is along those lines. I've heard teachers talk about like kids getting into relationships or breaking up. And it's usually in the context of all of their assignments were late. What's going on? Oh, I found out she broke up with her boyfriend. Oh, I found out she got cheated on or dumped or whatever it is. Like, it's everybody getting together to be like, what's going on with the student? Because they're absent from the learning in some important way, right? Like, their brains are not engaged with this.
I had a parent come in this year for parent-teacher conferences and was like, I'm just checking on so-and-so. They have their first partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And if their grades aren't high enough, they have to break up. And that was basically what the parent was doing.
That's kind of funny.
So, like, gossip is like such a whatever word, but we do talk about students, but it's also because we're like, do they treat you like this? Or are they like this in your room? You know?
Is this just me?
Do they hate me?
What's weird
Is this
about
personal?
this? All right, we're going to catch a few embarrassing moments here.
Okay.
Maybe yours, maybe somebody else's.
Okay.
Let's change gears here. What is the weirdest question a student has ever asked you?
The really strange thing is I can remember them from being a student better than I can remember them
Oh, that
from
counts.
being
That's
a
fair.
student. Oh, and that was, what's the difference between betrothal and a brothel? It was in my junior English class, and yeah, that was, you know, but I have told my students at one time ago that, you know, I know there's no such thing as a stupid question, but that was really, really close.
True.
What's the weirdest question a student has ever asked you?
A student asked me yesterday if I read sex books. And I just looked at her and I was like, why do you think that's appropriate to ask me?
I wonder what they meant by that exactly. Smut or just like...
Well, she laughed and then she's like, well, that's what she's reading. Because her friend was reading beside her and I was like... And she's like, I'm not, I swear I'm not. And I'm like, I don't care if you are, but just don't tell me.
I don't really need to know about that.
Yeah, I don't care what you're reading. I'm just happy that you're reading.
Just don't tell me.
What is the weirdest question a student ever asked you?
Probably, why did you become a teacher?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You think that's weird?
Well, the kid that asked me that, I told him I got in trouble with the law, and I was sentenced. I had a choice of going to jail or being a teacher, so I took being a teacher. He believed me.
Oh, Jack. Okay.
Okay, so are you in the teaching profession because you got sent to jail and had the option of becoming a teacher instead?
I know exactly how my dad delivered that. It was like so deadpan that the kid totally believed him.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Weirdest question I've ever been asked. I don't know if this is like the top weirdest, but my intro to the Holocaust unit is always like, it starts with like, tell me what you know about the Holocaust. And then I always have every kid write down a question they have about the Holocaust. And I do my best to answer them all, right?
Oh, boy.
And a student asked me, and they were being serious, if Adolf Hitler had only one testicle. He was so serious. And the whole room was like looking at me, and I'm like, is there like a punchline? Like, is there a joke? You know, I'm like, wait, because it's a room of teenagers. Like, you can't ask your English teacher, me, if Hitler had one testicle. I don't know. How would I know? I'm not Googling it on the school Google. Like,
Okay.
it turns out that's like a common belief of people. I froze. I was like, one what? Is that the word you said? Okay.
You said what now?
I thought you said one of those. Okay.
Okay. I mean, perhaps this is related to that, but what's the most embarrassing classroom moment you've had?
I have two.
Okay.
One time I ripped my pants.
You ripped your pants?
I ripped my pants.
Oh.
So I had to walk around all day with a flannel like around my waist, like I was in a grunge rock band in the 80s. That was a very hip moment for me. The other one, this is awful. I had this student in my homeroom their freshman year, and then I had him in class their sophomore year, and I had never known her to miss a day, and she missed like a week all of a sudden. So she came back, she didn't have her work done, like all of this stuff, and it was like so not her. And I was like, where you been? You just been like hanging out? You're on a cruise? What? And she was like, my dad died. And I was like, And she was like, oh yeah, he had cancer and he died. Thought I knew this student pretty well, had seen her every day for 2 years at that point, whatever. Took it upon myself that this was the time I was going to be the funny guy, apparently, and got hit with, my dad died. So I called the guidance office and I was like, did you, like, is this real, all of this stuff? And they're like, yeah, they didn't want us to tell the teachers. I'm like, well, the teacher knows because I'm an idiot, So that was super embarrassing. And I apologized, like, all over myself. And then I, like, called home and apologized. I was, like, beyond myself. I was such an idiot. I was that was one of my dumbest moments. And since then, I've never once said a thing about a kid missing.
We're going to hear from Allison again on this one. Question was, what was the most creative or ridiculous way that someone was caught cheating in your class?
My first year, we were doing research. And we talked about plagiarism for a whole day. And I said, plagiarism is when you like cut, paste, it's the exact same thing. I had a student from Spain, and he plagiarized, and it was word for word. So I call him down to the office, and it's me and the vice principal, and I said, this is plagiarism because it's the exact same thing. He goes, no, it's not. I typed it. And I said, he's like, you said cut and paste. I couldn't copy paste it, so I typed it. So it's not the same.
It's very literal.
Uh-huh.
I have software that I can see what all the Chromebooks are doing while they're working in my classroom. So if my kids are doing like a writing assignment, I'll have it up to make sure they're not playing, cool math games or something stupid. And I watched a kid put everything into ChatGPT, take it back out, put it in a shared doc with like 3 other kids in the same room, and I just watched them the whole period. And I let them do it the whole period. And you can like download their activity logs. And so I just downloaded it, and I let them work that entire time. They were silent. They were like so well behaved. It's because they were all cheating, or a handful of them were. And they turned it in, and they were so proud of themselves, and I just like uploaded the log of them cheating. And they thought they were really slick, so...
Okay. If you have a pre-planned time off where a substitute teacher is going to come in to take over for your class, do you expect them to teach to your lesson plans or materials that you leave, or do you just expect your class to be kept in line and not much else? What do you expect out of substitute teachers?
Forward progress.
Forward progress.
Yeah. I don't expect them to like lecture or anything, but I expect them to do what I've asked them to do. And as mentioned before, I thrive on routine, and my kids also know what our routines are. So my kids know what to do.
What do you hope your students would say about you as a teacher to people in the community on their version of Rate My Professor?
Oh, no. I would hope that they say I am considerate. Maybe they even made a connection to something we read. That would be a really nice compliment. But I hope that they would say that I'm considerate of them.
How do you really feel about teachers' pets? Can you guess who I talked to about this question?
My dad.
Yep.
Teachers' pets? Mm-hmm. I never really liked them because usually they're conniving to get something they want.
All right. What do you think? Conniving teachers' pets?
I think some of them certainly are. People would have called me a teacher's pet because I was a teacher's kid. Uh-huh. And I always like knew all my teachers because
I 100% was a teacher's pet.
Yeah. I think I can see how teachers' pets are looking to gain something. But I also know that I was a teacher's pet because I was an only child. And I was raised around all of my dad's friends my whole life. Mm-hmm. So when I had him in class, I was like, oh, hey, this dude I've been seeing, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that the people I would consider to be teachers' pets are the kids that I could trust to do something, tell me the truth, whatever. It's less about them trying to gain something. It's more about we have gotten to know each other in a way that we trust each other. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite as harsh on them.
Okay. Teaching philosophies and practices. Is there anything you wish you could teach but can't or don't?
Certainly. There's a couple of Toni Morrison pieces I could teach, but the content of them is just... I would really be pushing the limits of content that's appropriate.
Like age appropriateness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just rape and sexual assault and things like that. Those types of things are very hard to teach in a high school setting. So I think that what I wish I could teach are probably something like that.
What about like other subjects?
I would love to teach history. That's like my dream.
That's what Allison said too. History.
Yeah, she definitely would. I think history for sure. And I think I can probably speak for Allison here. I think that the way in which we teach is with an emphasis on history to understand what happened and why it happened and things like that.
Okay. Next question, and we have a response to it you can listen to, is what is one life lesson you hope to teach your students?
I always tried to treat everyone the same. And if you got in trouble, it wasn't because I didn't like you. It's because you were screwing around. Because I would yell at every kid. And it never bothered me to jump on even some of my favorite kids if they were screwing around.
Yeah. I agree with that. I really, really want them to be good, decent people. I want them to be willing to be open and considerate. And I want them to have patience. I really feel like teaching literature is a way to teach humanity. And so I try to encourage them to hear the other side, or to see the other side, or to be willing to speak from the other side. So I'm definitely more just like, be a good person and do good things and take care of others.
Well, related to that, the next question was, what are the true markers of success in your classroom? And Allison had something to say that's a little bit similar to what you were just saying.
I mean, I want them to be good humans. So if they're like being kind to each other, that's a mark of success. I had a student last year, their final is a research paper. It's this big thing. We spend like a whole quarter on it basically. And a student last year, who I had last year, had to do a research paper this year, but in a different format. But she remembered everything from last year. So she was like, oh, I did this and I did this and I did this. And I was like, oh, you're right. Like, you're going to be okay. And it's like those moments where it's like, oh, okay, like you can think and you can remember.
I've gotten through somehow.
Yeah. And like you retained it. You worked hard. You really tried. And I value trying like over a lot of stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like if you tried, I'm like, I will be more forgiving in that way. And I think it's more important that you try.
So what about for you? What do you think are the true markers of success in your classroom?
I think I would probably just second what Allison said. Effort, a willingness to put yourself out there, being willing to ask questions. The acceptance of the work that I did and the grade that it equates to might not always represent the actual learning that was completed. A lot of times students get very hung up on the literal letter, but a lot of times they'll say, oh, but you know, I understood it this way. And like, that's worth so much more to me than any grade letter that they could get. But that's hard to quantify with students who value grades because that's what the system has done to them.
Speaking of grades, have you ever had to fail anyone?
Yeah.
What does that look like? How's that process go?
It's long. It's not easy to do. You have to offer a lot of interventions. You have to contact home, whoever it is raising them. You have to provide evidence to the school. And because I'm a core subject, that means that they have to have my class to graduate. So that's very difficult. And so they'll usually have to go into some kind of remedial program to recover the credit. It has jeopardized graduation for students, and it's very, very difficult. It is not something I take lightly.
Yeah.
Especially with my seniors, it's very difficult. And I am probably more beat up about it than they are. It is a process. It's very difficult, actually, to fail a student. I would say it's more difficult to fail a student than anything else.
Yeah. This was a listener question. Just as a result of the pandemic and distance education trials of other varieties, is there a push for public school teachers to have larger virtual classes, kind of like those that are increasingly found on college campuses? So like, you know.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't really seen this
No.
very much in public schools. I definitely have seen tons of it at the college level. College education is suffering for that trend for what it's worth. But yeah, I haven't seen much of that either.
The only thing that we have now is students who take courses online to recover failed credits. That's all that we have. But yeah, I would say, at least in my scope of the world, that's a no for me.
Okay. The next question is, how would you address the teacher shortage? And Jack had something to say about that.
Okay.
One way to reduce the teacher shortage is not only better pay, but help pay tuition before they become teachers, or help them pay off student loans, because it costs more to become a teacher than you'll ever make in the first 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's not like in my day, it was fairly cheap. I went to a state university and didn't live on campus, and I imagine my 4 years only cost me around $1,000 because I had a $300 a quarter scholarship for those 4 years. In the first few years, it wasn't much at all. But I mean, I look at what we paid for Kate's, and I mean, I know she was making about maybe a year's tuition her first year. And luckily we had enough saved off to pay hers off. But I can't imagine going into debt. That would help and reduce their student loan and telling them, for every year you teach, we'll pay off so much of your student loan. That, to me, that would be an incentive, plus a decent pay. And the third thing is having a supervisor, a principal, administrator, whatever, who would actually back the teachers and look after their welfare instead of just piling on more crap.
More crap.
Piling on more crap.
That's very Jack. I think I'm with Jack. The pay increase would really help. The fact that people know when they become a teacher that they're never going to be living, not like I think everybody wants to be high off the horse or something like that, but it would be nice to know that you've got a savings and comfort and stability. And I think people know that teaching is not always those things.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, when we're talking about like increasing teacher pay at this point in time and like with this economy, I think what I mean by that is like, gee, wouldn't it be nice if teachers could have savings?
Yeah.
Of any sort,
Yeah.
like literally any savings. Wouldn't it be nice if teachers weren't operating only from paying back huge chunks of debt? Like, wouldn't it be nice if we weren't constantly under stress from debt that we've accrued? Those are the kinds of things I mean. I don't mean like, gosh, shouldn't teachers live a lavish lifestyle of fancy dinners
I
and
don't have
dancing.
to drive a Lambo to work or anything. But
yeah, when we're talking about increasing teacher pay, we're like talking about making it so that teachers especially, don't feel like they're constantly under threat of losing their homes or their cars or whatever because of debt. And anyway, that's kind of like, those are the pressures that are attached to the teaching profession, unfortunately. So,
but yeah, I think the cost of college is a big factor. The pay of a teacher is not enough to offset that. And I also think that, especially post-COVID, that teachers are an easy thing to bully. And it's not really, I mean, I don't know if I would be telling my child to pursue a life of being picked on.
Okay, next question. This is about kind of dreaming big about redesigning the school experience. I want you to hear some comments from Terry real quick before I get into it.
One of my hopes for education, and it's sad to me that so much of education still looks like it did when my parents were in school. I mean, not even just when I was in school or when you were in school, but like when my parents were in school. Why is it like that? There are so many other possibilities. And I'm going to sound like I don't teach English, but the stuckness. That I know there's a better word, so you can fill it in when you know. But the fact that it's so monolithic and the idea of actually making a change. And I do think in small pockets, there are places that are making changes. We were talking about the AP seminar class, and one of the things that I was reading was talking about so cool to see kids get to embrace their interest because they can learn all these skills in following their own genuine questions. And I think we don't do that.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we give kids the opportunity to say, okay, what are you really into? Okay, how can you learn English and math and all these other things by pursuing your interest in this particular thing? And if you don't have anything that you're particularly interested in now, okay, what's something you're a little bit interested in? And then if that doesn't work, well, you know what I mean? I have yet to meet a kid who has nothing. They just have nothing to offer the world. Even some of the least engaged in school kids I've met, if you talk to them about some other things, they have friends and they have interests. They're just not connected to traditional school. But we don't tend to engage them every part of their intelligence.
So what about you? If you were going to redesign the entire experience of formal education, where would you start? What problems would you want to be addressing?
I mean, literacy would still be a huge focus, regardless, because that's a skill you're going to need for the rest of your life. But I also think, along the lines of what Terry said, I would be looking for ways to make connections to things that people do have an interest in pursuing, and then building courses around that type of work that would somehow behoove their future work. And that would be a way to work in math and sciences and history, all of these core studies that sometimes when you're taking them, you don't understand the connections to other things. But if we built it around deeper interests, then we could probably build on that natural willingness.
I think I'd get rid of subjects altogether. That's not to say that I'd get rid of like subject matter expertise or anything, but I think I would get rid of the concept of like, okay, I'm going to this classroom for this, that now I'm math thinking.
Right.
This is math time. And now I go to another classroom. Okay, now this is English time. I think if I were starting over completely from scratch, I think I'd try to teach them way more holistically. Because I think all that categorization tends to do is it doubles down on those like stereotypes that we were talking about earlier from a staff position. Like, okay, coaches teach history, nerds teach science. Like those kinds of things are not very helpful. And I think that breaking those down is also useful. But I also think that making kids less like, oh, now I'm going to the subject that I don't like. They're pre-checked out because they think they're not good at math. And it's like, well, if we can show how math is telling a story in the same way that these things I'm reading in English are telling a story, it is possible to do that. Because I've seen that. I've been on the receiving end of that kind of education where things are taken much more in a much more integrated way and treated less like they're random disparate disciplines. I think that the really hard fracturing of disciplines is partly why we stagnated, like innovation wise, in our current moment in our country's history.
Yeah.
Okay. What advice would you share for someone who's about to start student teaching?
Oh, don't take yourself so seriously. Remember that so much of what you would get from a kid is not really about you. It's so much about them. That's just hard to, that's a hard lesson to learn for a long time as a teacher.
I told Katie, don't do it. I told her, get in a different business because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't listen.
What advice would you share for someone who's in your shoes but 3 years ago, who's just starting out?
I had a coworker at my summer job who was like, did I tell you I changed my major to teaching? And I looked at him and I was like, are you sure? And he looked at me and he's like, yeah. And I said, well, someone asked me that, so I'm asking you that. Like, why do you want to be a teacher? And so he told me, and he's like, I want to work with people and I want to do that. But it's always, are you sure? Before you dive headfirst into it, like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Get a therapist, because that's good and that helps. It's helped me. And get a therapist before you hit rock bottom. Schedule days off. Don't work yourself until you are sick, because I have done that and it's not fun. Send kids to the office. My college was like, don't send kids to the office. If you do, you'll ruin your relationship with them and like it'll be irreparable and like the principals are going to punish them. Never send them to the office. And I should have sent them to the office. And I think the biggest one for me, just because I was so young, was like, it's okay to not be nice. You can be harsh and it's fine. As long as you're not doing it too much. You don't need to be liked by them. You just need them to do what you need them to do.
Respected more than liked.
Right. Like if you can show respect to them in a way that will guarantee they'll respect you back, that's the most important part.
What do you think?
Are you sure is a good question.
Uh-huh.
Do you want to never really have a savings? That's an important question. But yeah, I would say be ready to laugh at yourself and be ready to say, I don't know. I think those are probably as good as you can do it.
It's good advice.
I definitely came into it thinking I knew a lot more than I did. And probably my first 5 years, I was unlearning something every day. And then after about 5 years, I finally started learning something that was useful.
You got 100 episodes in and you reach basic competence?
I reached competency and then I had to actually learn. Yeah.
Did you ever think of pursuing or actively pursue a career outside of education?
I knew when I was young it was what I wanted to do. But when I started doing it, I wasn't sure I could do it forever. I still don't know if I can do it forever. Do I think I probably could have found happiness in other jobs? Sure. I think that now I know that I would not be as greatly rewarded as I am to do something else. And that would be what I was missing when I was thinking about leaving education.
What were you thinking about doing if you weren't going to be a teacher?
I thought I wanted to do something in like ed tech, like help build things that would support teachers like me in the classroom, that made lives easier. Could be a lot of things, right? Tools or whatever actual products that teachers use. But what I realized was the part of teaching that I actually love is the students. And that would be the thing I was leaving to keep the other parts. And so that was basically when the search stopped, was when I realized that what I actually love is the time in the room with them. But every day, if you sent me some nice email job that made $100,000 a year, I'd probably think about it.
Ponder it.
Yeah, I would. I don't think I'll ever be so committed that I wouldn't at least consider something just for the sake of my own health or to better myself. But those kids are the reason why, you keep doing it. So you can't recreate them anywhere else, sadly.
What is your personal philosophy of education?
Oh my gosh. My philosophy is I want to equip students with skills that help them navigate the world, be it, and that's such a dumb answer, but it's like the answer, because I want them to be able to read things and suss out if this information is accurate or relevant or trustworthy. That's something I really value as an English teacher, is my students' ability to look at something and know if they should trust it or not. And that comes at the biggest time of disinformation ever.
I was going to say, that's becoming more and more dire.
So I want to equip them with the knowledge that helps them discern that type of information that they'll encounter every single day on every single platform forever and ever.
So helping them be like critical thinkers about what they're consuming.
I want them to be, I think I've already kind of said this, I want them to be willing and open humans. And I want them to be willing to put themselves in places where they might not fit in, but find a way to be heard and valued and things like that. And I hope that they're always, it's the Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. That's like, I think if I had to boil down education, it would be to always be curious, but to not be judgmental of others. So I want to equip them to be well-informed, right? But also I really want them to be good people.
You clearly care about your students. How do you separate wanting to kind of help or save them from sticky situations that they might find themselves in, or, socially? How do you separate those desires to like help and be protective from being their teacher, which is obviously like you have to balance professionalism with wanting to be a really important resource for them. What's that balancing act look like for you?
I've learned the hard way. It has been probably one of the hardest things to learn as a teacher, of where to draw the line. Part of why I want to equip them to make good decisions is for this reason, right? So that I don't have to go to bat for them. What I have found, though, is that I can only do so much for people in terms of what decisions that they will make, and that their failure to make what I would consider the good or right choice is not my fault. And I had to separate myself from that a lot, because I would take things very personally when my former students or students would do something very stupid. It would feel like a slight to me.
I mean, that's hard. That's just hard in general with interpersonal relationships. When you feel like you should have some level of effectiveness over somebody else's behavior, just because you want people to like care about and respect one another, and you would hope that would mean
themselves,
right, and themselves. But you would hope that would mean that if you're expressing something that is clearly coming from a place of concern or care, that it would make some difference to their calculus. And it just doesn't always, because the way that you've thought through something doesn't have all the same variables as the way that they've thought through the thing.
I just had to learn that it wasn't my failure. And that was hard to learn.
Yeah.
Because it felt like I had failed them. And the truth was that I had done the best I could with as much time as I had, or whatever. And I have to be willing to separate myself. And I have had students do things that I could never have guessed that they would do. That's a hard part of teaching, for sure. To read about them in the news or something, and to think, wow, that is a kid that I really connected with, or that we really got along, or, that we talked about tough stuff. You just have to separate yourself, and you have to not put the blame on yourself, even when that's what you want to do. This
next question is, if you could speak directly to community members, what what would you want them to know about how they could best support the work of educators in the classroom?
I think one of the biggest issues across the board is everybody has experience with teachers. Everybody has an opinion about what a good teacher is, and it's different from person to person. My dad will be like, oh, I think you should do this because this would be really great. But in my head, I'm like, no, that's not going to work because of these reasons. But everybody has been through school to some extent. So everybody has input. So they're like, well, this is just what we need to do, and this is how we fix the problem. So I think that's part of it. I think it's like book banning. I also think like sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, when people get worried about what's happening in schools, they underestimate how mature the students are and what they can handle. We're getting ready to read Huck Finn and the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass is not banned, but Huck Finn is because of the use of the N-word. And so when we were discussing the N-word, I told them, I think you guys are mature enough to understand and not use this word and whatever. And I think you can handle it. And I think they appreciated that. And I understand why, because it's like parents want to protect their kids from how awful the world is. So I get it. But I think if they recognized a little bit, like, oh, the kids are all right.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's like, you know, these parents want to protect from a world without realizing that a lot of people aren't afforded those protections.
Right.
Like on the basis of who they are or what they look like. Like
Right.
that's sort of the whole point.
Right.
I don't know. It's like, yeah, you might have the luxury of being sheltered from the worst of what humanity has to offer, but not everybody has that privilege.
Right. When it's like, if they don't learn it here, especially with the internet, the stuff that we talk about that's like sensitive topics are already things that they're seeing or hearing or whatever. So it's like, why not just have them in the classroom where we can be like, okay, let's actually look at this.
Where there's structure and
Right.
consequences and rules for engagement.
And you can like believe the things that your teachers are telling you in large part. You have someone who is an expert in that area and they can tell you. You don't have to just take like some random guy's word for it, which a lot of them do. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok has done all
Filtering
of
out
that.
signal to noise in information is becoming a bigger and bigger problem.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you want to say directly to community members about how they could best support the work of educators in the classroom?
I encourage them to talk to educators. I get met so many times with, well, I heard this was happening. It's like, well, who'd you hear it from? So-and-so. Like, okay, do they work in the school? No. Okay. Do they have a connection to the school? No. Where'd they get it? I don't know. That
Facebook is probably the answer.
Yeah, like, it's the same thing with, like, the boogeyman of, like, well, they don't teach this in schools anymore, and they don't stand for the pledge. Like, do you know how many times I read online that we don't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And people being like, bring it back to schools. And it's like, I got news for you. We do it, and look at the world. Like, maybe, you know. So,
I edited it out, but your dad said the exact same thing.
so that kind of stuff always cracks me up. It's also like, well, they don't teach them how to do cursive anymore. And it's the actual truth of the matter is that they do learn cursive. It is not hit as hard as it once was because of the age of computers.
I just
But-
don't quite understand like why people have such an attachment to cursive writing.
What's
It's
the
just like,
purest movement of that?
is
Like,
it? I think it's just because it's what they learned.
Yeah.
Like it's what you were taught. So you just want people to keep doing what you were taught.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love cursive. Don't get me wrong. I think it's pretty, but I also think there's probably an
a lot
inordinate
of
amount
fonts
of
are
time
pretty,
of
too.
classroom hours that used to be spent on teaching how to write it. And I'm not really sure that in the grand scheme of things, if we have to budget our time, that's where I would budget the modern learner's time. So
I would encourage people to stop reading Facebook and to actually talk to people in schools. I think that's a good place to start. It might be beneficial to actually talk to a teacher. So there's that. I would encourage them to be involved. Find out what's happening at your schools. Find out what we offer. Find out what we do. Find out how we support. Especially during COVID, I heard a lot of, well, the school's not doing this, or we're not. It's like, we are. You just didn't hear about it. I think a lot of people would be more pleased with the education system if they were an active part of it.
I also think that unfortunately schools are often not equipped to communicate that stuff well. social technology, social media and mass communication technology have far outpaced what schools are capable of. And so this communication gap that you're talking about, it's exacerbated by these social platforms, obviously, because they're so pernicious in how communication happens. But I also think that at the same time, schools are under-equipped to meet the demands of communicating with a contemporary stakeholder.
It's also as simple as like, okay, the place that I work, there's a little diner in town, and that's always where we hear all the stories coming from about the school, is this one diner, this breakfast spot. And so they'll be like, oh, they're saying at so-and-so's diner that this is what's happening. And it's like, well, they know before we do, you know? And so like we joke about the information that they have at the diner because we don't have it. But my principal, basically, he was telling us in a recent meeting that he had been hearing about what some people were saying, a specific community member was saying at this diner, and he just called him up and they talked about it. I think that's great because now my principal has laid a foundation for a conversation with someone who talks very loudly and is heard very publicly about stuff that's going on. And that changed it. That changed the course of the conversation, which was good.
Yeah.
And
but
so,
I think that's like an act of communication.
yeah, and you have to have the time to do that. And it's difficult to cut out the time to do that kind of work. In short, I would say to stop getting your information from Facebook. I would say to actually attend events, maybe even at your local schools to see what's going on, or to call them and say, what do you need and what do you do and how can I help you? And stop just jumping to conclusions about what you think is the sanctity of something that you were once taught or whatever.
I think that goes back to kind of like what Terry was saying. Like, things have largely not changed. Like, you might think that, oh, back in my day, we did blah, blah. But it's like, things look pretty much the same as what they did when we went through school. Different.
And people will be like, well, I used to be able to walk into the school. And it's like, okay, well, guess what? We've lost that privilege because we keep dying in schools. Sorry, like a lot of people have ruined that for the rest of us. I don't know what to tell you, sir. I've heard that a few times, though. And I'm always like, okay, what about my safety? So, anyways.
Okay, last question. It's a big one. Can curiosity be taught? I kind of messed up and I didn't find the clip for it when I was doing the editing because I kind of accidentally scrubbed through it. But your dad said no. He said that he thought that there are some kids who want to learn and some kids who don't. So I thought that was interesting, and we'll contrast it with Terry and Allison also both responded to this.
100%, I would say it can be. It can be taught. I may not be the person who can do it for that particular student, and without removing these barriers, I may not be able to, but I do. I just have to say that barring some serious actual brain problems where their brain is not able to interact with the world in a typical way, I do think, because I know kids that I've had trouble with who have then blossomed for other teachers, or kids who didn't seem like they were doing much of anything here, who then went on and you did, like, you're like, that kid? No. I don't know, but that's why I'm a teacher, because I believe that.
I think more people have like a predisposition for curiosity, but I think some people are just like, they haven't found what interests them or what they're curious about at this point in their life. And I think especially like where we're at in a small town, it's also difficult because there's not as many opportunities to see what you're interested in. So I think it is, but we also need to like acknowledge that curiosity is okay, even if it deviates away from the lesson plan, which is hard, especially if you're being observed.
All right. What do you think?
I think I'm probably more in line with Allison, which is that some people are more and less curious. I compare this to Chelsea, and Chelsea's like the most curious person I've ever met. She's willing to learn and put herself out there to like really find out anything about anything, and even things that sometimes don't fall into what I would like consider her like normal scope of interest. She's willing, and I am very much not that way. I'm willing and curious about some things, right? But most things I'm like, okay. Anyways, it's hard because hearing each of them answer it, I can see why they all said that. I totally understand why my dad said no, because I'm sure he was met with learners that he never found a way for them to be curious about something. And I can see with Terry, she is the most optimistic person I've ever met. She has hope in people that So I think I'm much more middle of the road like Allison. I think we could all be curious. It's a matter of finding the thing we're curious about. And I think for some people, they maybe never find it. And I think that for some people, it's a lot of things. And so we see it in them at a very young age and persistent. I think I would want to say that I encourage my students to be curious, but that it's very hard to find that thing because it took me a long time to find out what I was curious about too. And so I think I'm gonna play the middle of the road on that one. You have forced me to have a more open mindset about this because I certainly would have 10 years ago been more like my dad to say that some kids just aren't.
I feel like I have this conversation with my dad all the time too. We kind of argue about these questions. And like one thing that I was saying is a lot of the assumptions of the way modern education systems work is like we do assume that you can teach curiosity. I think I do fall on the side of, yes, it can be cultivated. It can be encouraged and developed. I don't think that everybody's just stuck with the level of curiosity that they have. But I also think that a lot of the constraints that emerge out of contemporary school systems make it really, really hard for certain teachers to actuate that kind of learning with certain kinds of students. On the whole, it looks like the system isn't doing as well of a job as it could be doing with fostering curiosity because we're pairing up teachers with learners who maybe don't work, the teacher just doesn't speak to them, whatever it is, or this like rigid idea of subjects, like a kid doesn't like math or a kid doesn't like English or whatever it is. I think that a lot of times the structure of modern schools works against pursuing curiosities and developing them. Yes, I think that everybody is capable of having their curiosity developed. Is the modern school system doing the best job of it that it could be? Probably not.
I can also say that knowing what my dad taught and who he taught, I understand that answer for him. Because he taught 8th grade at a tested time for American history. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of the actual courses that we teach allow us to see or not see those things. And I think that there's a lot more flexibility for an English teacher to maybe spark curiosity than there might be for a history teacher who's locked into, I think he was Civil War to World War II or something like that. You know, people who are curious will only be so curious about that. And he wouldn't have had a lot of room to push. He's been out of the classroom since 2011. So he, it's been a minute. Yeah.
I think that is finally the end of the Ask Me Anything. Do you have any final thoughts, any parting shots for our 100th birthday episode?
No, I don't. It was
our
fun.
episode of competence.
I wish I would have thought a little bit more about some of the texts that I suggested, but I stand firm with my answers. I'm good. Books that changed my life or something, I'm going to be thinking about it, I'm sure, and it will come to me.
Well, it's okay. If you
might have to update it.
If you want to revise your answers later, you can. Yeah, I picked books that I'd read more recently, but there were books in college that definitely made a really big impact on me. Those were when I was reading the big, like Dostoevsky made a big dent on my brain in college.
So I'll think on it and add it later, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, listeners, thank you so much. This has been a really great, what year are we in? Every time I ask this question,
24.
I get it wrong. We're in year 4?
Oh, of the pod? Year of the pod.
Are we in year 4?
We were recording in 2020, 21, 22, year 5.
Wow.
Because we started right before COVID.
We really appreciate you sticking around. This has been a fun episode for us to do, just kind of retrospective on teaching and on interacting with you all. And thanks so much for writing in your questions. They clearly made a difference to this episode. We really appreciate it.
And nice job, Chelsea, on coordinating and choreographing that. It's going to be...
It was really fun to talk to your dad and your colleagues, I will say, that made all the difference. And it made me want to talk to more people about these questions. It made me want to just gobble up all the audio I possibly could about these things.
So nice job on that.
It's really fun. So thank you, listeners. It's been a great time, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
Bye. Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
Final thoughts for the podcast?
What is it that Bob Barker would always say? Spay and neuter your animals.